A very warm welcome to the Him Connect track here today. We are trying to build more conversations here where we can talk more about how we can build climate resilience in the Himalayan region. We today have three entrepreneurs who are working in the space of waste and seems like they're long lost friends today. So pretty chatty up today. Here we are. Um, in our today's agenda, we, along with Climate Collective, first of all, my name is Kamna Hazrati. I'm the founder of And Purpose. We are our ecosystem enabler for sustainability and social impact based out of India, building for the world, and trying to have more conversations in the sustainability domain as a very mainstream conversation. We are very happy to host this track today, where we are going to talk about wastewater in the Himalayan region. Uh, in the next coming 3 hours, you'll have a lot of information coming in. A, for building in waste management in the Himalayan region, then a very exciting pitch hosted by our fellow partners, Climate Collective, and then another session where we talk again more about how we build climate resilient infrastructure in the Himalayan region. So pretty packed up 3 hours. Um, Today in this panel, we bring three very different but very deeply connected approaches to strengthening Himalayan ecosystems. We have one who is working at the intersection of nature finance and policy infrastructure. We have one building high altitude community-led waste systems where actually none existed. And we have one formalizing circular economy ecosystems through regulation and compliance frameworks. They operate at very different levels, grassroots, markets, and policy. Our objective of this particular panel is that you'll get to learn more about how we can build from 0 to 1 and perhaps to 10. Uh, they're all building systems where formal systems were weak or absent. But before we start with our sessions, uh, I know we are quite very few of us here, but just a sense of, who all are we today? Are we non-profits, think tanks, startups, PIs? Show of hands, non-profits? Non-profits. Terry, non-profits? Oh, wonderful. Students? Terry? Okay. Okay, wonderful. So what we are gonna do today is have more interweaving conversations between from founders to PIs to how you can actually take your researches to action, and then if you're building, then how you can actually scale your businesses, and then how government and policy works in this ecosystem. Before we jump onto the conversation, a very quick but illustrious introduction of our speakers today. We have Swapan Mehra with us. Swapan is the founder and CEO of IORA Ecological Solutions. It's an environmental advisory firm in India advancing climate action through nature-based solutions. Swapan is a ex-IIFM? Yes, and a master's in public administration from Harvard Kennedy School. He is a World Economic Forum Young Global Leader, Donella Meadows Fellow, and Lead India Fellow as well. You have authored 40 plus climate publications. That's quite, I can keep reading. It's quite an illustrious career, trajectory that you have built, Swapan. Swapan is the CEO and co-founder of IORA Nature Tech and founder and trustee of IORA Ecological Trust as well. Along with Swapan, we have today Pranshu Singhal. Pranshu is the founder and CEO of Karo Sambhav. Pranshu has been in this space for about 25 plus years. He has worked as a director of digital learning for Microsoft, head sustainability for Nokia. He was the Social Entrepreneur of the Year 2021 India by Schwab Foundation, World Economic Forum. Pranshu is the member of World Economic Forum Global Future Councils on Responsible Use. And he is also the vice chair of National Working Group 5 of India, International Telecommunication Union, and Telecommunication Standardization Union, Standardization Sector Study Group 5. Again, too much heavy stuff in our panel's career trajectory today. He's also an Ashoka Fellow, an Aspen Fellow, a Schwab Fellow, a Shivning Gurukul Fellow, an IKEA Fellow, and an Aspire Fellow. Uh, and along with Pranshu and Swapan, we have Pradeep here. Pradeep is an environmentalist, mountaineer, a founder of Healing Himalayas Foundation. And of all of us who know the Himalayan region and the waste, we always know of Healing Himalayas, absolute wonderful work in the Himalayan region. He's a pioneer force in high altitude circular waste systems. He has developed community-led models and reverse logistics networks across some of the toughest Himalayan terrains, transforming waste management where actually no formal systems existed. I am pretty much excited about this conversation because it goes from on ground to how you build it to a sustainable momentum and then how you include policy in it as well. So a big round of applause for our speakers today. Yeah. And a very warm welcome to all of you. Thank you for taking your seats today. Makes a warm heart. If all of you can also come and sit down in this panel today, I hope we'll all have something to carry back.
Thank you. Okay, so before I have given a round of introductions to all of us, all of you today, but I also, in your own words, perhaps, in a sentence or two, if you will want to introduce who you are, what you're doing, and then we will start building, the conversation from there up. Cool?
Yeah, hi, good morning, everyone. And thank you very much, Kamna, for organizing this panel, very, very pertinent panel, and for this warm welcome. So as Kamna mentioned, I run Iora Ecological Solutions, which is a Delhi-based nature finance organization. We work on identifying large landscapes with degradation and climate vulnerability issues, and then putting together financing and technology solutions that can restore at scale. As an example, we are working in Meghalaya, where we have identified forest fires resulting from shifting cultivation as a key driver of degradation, resulting in drying of all the springs, resulting in reduction in community livelihoods. And now we put together an investment plan in which we've sourced carbon finance and other bilateral, multilateral finance to restore about 30,000 hectares, get new livelihood to communities, set up models to process agri-waste, set up models to conserve water. And our goal is that through these models, we make the sustainable management of landscapes more viable economically for communities than unsustainable management. So that's what we do. Our expertise spans across geospatial analysis, climate finance, carbon finance, community engagement, agriculture system management, and waste management to some extent. Thank you.
Hi everyone. I run an organization, Karo Sambhav, which works in the space of circular economy. What we do is we work in multiple sectors: electronic waste, batteries, plastics, tires, and also glass. The primary focus of the organization is to set up collection systems at a country level, and starting from urban areas, but then slowly penetrating into semi-urban, rural. We haven't reached rural still, but the whole goal is, can we make it easy for people to participate in collection systems? And most of the people today expect money for waste. So how do we also start financing this? Because without that, we have found none of these systems really survive. A second body of work that we do is create recycling solutions. And I would like to say high quality recycling solutions. Because what happens historically is most of the waste recycled is downcycled, which means you start from a high quality item. Let's say plastics from a printer, but you end up making a park bench, a bucket, a mug from that. How do we recycle these products in a way that circularity happens? Material extracted from a product goes back into creation of a new product. So that's the second line of work that we do. And the third body of work that we are now very deeply engaged is, it's on the critical raw material side. And essentially, from waste, how do we extract these materials and put them back into the manufacturing value chains of India? So these are the three bodies of work that we do. I'll be delighted to have discussions as we go ahead.
Hi, morning. Namaste. My name is Pradeep Sangwan, and thank you for the invitation. I started this organization called Healing Himalayas. It's a very young initiative, pretty much required in the mountains, in the Himalayas. As the name suggests, we try and heal the Himalayas, although we are very small in front of the Himalayas. The idea behind Healing Himalayas is to create an ecosystem of waste collection, community engagement, the lost traditional cultural practices that we had in terms of upcycling, and also reintroducing livelihood through solid waste is primary goal for us. And also considering Himalayan topography and its difficulties, we try and create a reverse supply chain, how financially viable it can be in the upper Himalayan region. And this is what we've been doing for last 10 years. Hopefully there's no need for us to do it again, but the way I see it, we need to be there for rest of our lives to manage solid waste in the mountains.
I actually wanted to. Audible?
Closer.
Okay. Am I audible? Yeah. Okay. So I actually wanted to start with you only, Pradeep. You work at the grassroots, and how old is Healing Himalayas now?
It's been 10 years now. Next
Wow.
month we are celebrating our 10th anniversary.
Oh wow! Congratulations in advance. What made you start that? And I'm sure it must have been being there, because I know that you were trekking. So being there, how it would have felt, and what made you start this?
It's primarily for the love of the mountains. I've been trekking, traveling, exploring all for myself. And then eventually after 5 years of doing that, I realized there was no purpose to what I was doing. It was just, individual love for the mountains. But how do we, and back in 2012, if you see the most of the the young generation, people started venturing beyond certain locations. They started traveling, exploring new places. A lot of movies helped in that aspect, Ye Jawani Hai Diwani type movies. And then when people started traveling, exploring, they also started littering, for which the local communities never had an answer to. They had very basic idea how to handle solid waste. The typical way of handling solid waste is either burn it or throw it in a river, which eventually ends up hurting the local ecosystem also, and also the people living downstream. So we thought, why not add a purpose to trekking? Trekking for a purpose basically was the theme that we started with. And we engaged local communities, trekkers, that if you want to give back while trekking, while you enjoy yourself also, then this can be the platform. There are two extreme communities that we see today in the system. One is the the shepherds of the Himalayas, and second is the urban people who go to the mountains, de-stress themselves. Over a weekend they go to the mountains, trek, party, play loud music, bonfire, etc., etc., and create a lot of demand. On the other side, this shepherd community who's been there for thousands of years, the pastoral community who depends on the the Himalayan ecosystem which is out there, and they are very close to the mountains. They have a very difficult life, yet they don't disturb the very nature they depend upon. So two communities, very different thinking, very different approach. How to bring them together was the idea, that how can we learn from each other. Somebody who's not learned, educated enough, but yet very close to the nature, they know how to connect with the nature. On the contrary, people who live in the urban spaces or in the rural spaces come down to the mountains. They have all sort of, six-figure salary, good houses, but they don't know how to reconnect with nature. They bring their lifestyle habits to the mountains as they are used to in the urban spaces, which was really creating a lot of chaos in the Himalayan ecosystem. So I thought, why not bring them together and create a, middle path? As Lord Buddha said, how do we create that path wherein everybody is benefited? The nature survives, we also enjoy our life in the mountains. So that's why Healing Himalayas came to the picture, and we organized thousands of cleaning drives, hundreds, thousands of volunteers being part of our campaigns. And we see a lot of change also, that how communities are now dictating terms, that if you are coming to my villages, then you need to follow the rules that we set for you. You can't come to my house and practice all the can't be uncivilized in my village. So this is something we wanted to reintroduce, because as tourism grows, the traditional ways of livelihood starts disappearing. One of the examples that I gave you earlier also, when we built Atal Tunnel 5 years back, it was primarily for the defense forces, but it was also used for tourism. And when tourism reaches such altitudes with so much of ease, it brings a lot of destruction to that well. and all the agriculture-based, local communities transformed into tourism-based economies, and which brought in a lot of, massive infrastructure. All the hotels started mushrooming up, waste started generating, and nobody was bothered. And also agriculture, they outsourced all the agricultural practices. And when you outsource your, land, then it brings a lot of pesticides, lots of chemicals, because they are more worried about chemical, the production. The method is not the priority. So how easily we degrade ourselves, our lifestyle, our livelihood, our ways of handling our agricultural practices. And then that's where we started building those facilities. The community saw for the first time how to manage waste. They never seen a material recovery facility. They never knew that what is the secondary segregation. They didn't know how to segregate it properly. The varieties of materials within the MRF, within plastics also. If you see a plastic bottle, there are 4 varieties: the bottle cap, the ring around it, the wrapper around it, the plastic bottle. 4 different varieties and 4 different ways of recycling. So it was very new for them, and that's what we introduced in different parts of the Himalayan region. And then that brought in a lot of change within the community and sort of created, a way forward, something that can be replicated by other communities. So yes, this is what we've been doing.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that, Pradeep. Pranshu, coming to you. So you work in e-waste and e-waste recycling. And for many young founders, policy and compliance sound complicated. How can someone actually identify a real business opportunity in waste?
So when we talk of, let me go beyond e-waste, complex products. What you will find is today, and let's keep the context of Himalayas, the amount of complex products that is reaching our life is increasing dramatically. Think of, the kind of electronics that you had in any household, rural, urban, any type. It was very few, complex products. And look at it now. From the number of LED lights that you see on a, for any occasion, permanent LED lights lagi rehti hain, kharab hoti hain. You talk of products like a smartwatch, which die in 3 months. Products like your neck bands, this, that. The complexity of products is increasing. And not just from a consumption point of view, but also from a utility point of view. Let's look at, amount of solar panels which are out there, amount of off-grid solar products like a Laltane. Now, the challenge with most of these products is they are getting dispersed very easily because of the kind of distribution systems that we have created. But there is nothing to get them back, nothing whatsoever. So what you end up seeing is massive build-ups which are starting to happen in all sorts of communities with complex products. And for complex products, I can even talk of things like, a polyurethane. Sofa mein jo foam lagti hai, jo mattress mein foam lagti hai, even those sort of things are increasing, and these are complex materials which are not easily recycled. Now the nightmare which is starting to happen is, traditionally it was solid waste which was a nightmare which people like Pradeep are trying to handle. But the quantum of these new varieties of waste, which are not very old, they are getting created over the last decade or so. Most of these products have been created. This amount of waste is increasing dramatically. Now, considering the fact that these products are expensive, unlike let's say a packet of chips, people don't want to part away even when they are dead. They expect कि मैंने तो 2000 रुपए का ये हेडफोन लिया था, अब ये टूट गया है, लेकिन इसमें कुछ तो मुझे मिलना चाहिए वापस. So it keeps on piling, and then you don't really know what to do with it. So the nightmare which is happening is on 2 sides. First, you are getting a lot of accumulation of this material with no idea what to do. Second, for our own manufacturing units, we need materials, and a lot of these products contain critical raw materials which are today geopoliticized, let me put it that way, and you don't have access. So one of the biggest bodies of work for me, if we have to solve this problem, is how do you get these products back, from all these households, from so widely distributed communities, and that is the biggest nightmare. The challenge is also, how do you pay for this collection? Because there is this expectation of people कि मुझे कुछ तो पैसा मिलना चाहिए. मैंने 10,000 रुपए का फ़ोन लिया था, मैंने 50,000 रुपए का टीवी लिया था, मैंने गद्दा लिया था 3,000 रुपये का, 5,000 रुपये का, कुछ तो मुझे मिलना चाहिए, उसमें कुछ है ही नहीं तो आपको मिलेगा कहाँ से? एंड द कॉस्ट ऑफ जस्ट पिकअप इज सो हाई. Think of a broken charger for that matter. The material value in a charger is less than 50 paise. If I were to truly recycle it. If I were to talk of a phone, I am talking of a 50 rupee material value. How do you pay someone जिसकी expectation है 500 रुपये मेरे को दो पुराने टूटे फ़ोन के लिए? I am saying everything including. Because all the tech that you will put in place to extract the materials is also going to cost. And the biggest chunk of money in a country like India or most emerging markets actually go into buying that old product back. अगर मैं यूरोप से कंपेयर करूँ तो the cost of buying a product is zero. क्योंकि people are coming and giving it. In our case, we end up buying it. So how do I say, fundamentally recreate collection systems ताकि लोगों के लिए बहुत आसान हो participate करना और trust भी हो system में. ट्रेडिशनली म्यूनिसिपैलिटीज़ की वजह से ट्रस्ट बहुत टूटा है वेस्ट मैनेजमेंट पे, क्योंकि लोगों ने अगर अलग भी करा, सेग्रीगेशन भी करा, तो म्यूनिसिपैलिटी का ट्रक आता है, वो मिला के लेके चला जाता है. तो इवन इफ पीपल वांट टू पार्टिसिपेट, उनको यही लगता है ये फ्रॉडुलेंट सिस्टम तो नहीं है. सो अगर कुछ लोग अच्छा करना भी चाहते हैं तो वो ट्रस्ट का बहुत बड़ा डेफिसिट है आज की डेट में सोसाइटी का. सो दीज फॉर मी टेक्नोलॉजी इज़ अ ईजी पार्ट. रिसाइकलिंग इज़ मच ईजियर देन कलेक्शन सिस्टम्स. How do you make people participate? How do you encourage them to truly believe that this is the right thing to do? And how do you take away that love for money that should ideally come back? Because वो है ही नहीं. एयर कंडीशनर में वो मिल सकता है बिकॉज 25,000 रुपये का आप एयर कंडीशनर खरीद रहे हो, बट उसमें मटेरियल वैल्यू बहुत है. इट हैज़ कॉपर, इट हैज़ एल्युमिनियम, इट हैज़ आयरन, सो यू कैन जनरेट एटलीस्ट 4,000 to 5,000 rupees from a air conditioner. But for a mobile phone, whatever the value, the amount of materials is still 40 to 50 rupees, maybe 60 rupees at best. So these are some of the challenges which I like to put.
But how do people identify opportunities in this? What are the opportunities in this?
It is all opportunities at the end of the day. The thing is, how do you create these creative solutions? Because if you were to ask me an answer, I myself is struggling. But answer तो है, क्योंकि just think about the दिवाली की lights कितनी होती हैं, the amount of waste. LED lights contain gallium, which is a critical raw material. Now, अगर इसके collection systems बन जाएं, तो you can really power a very large critical raw material solution. But you need some scale. So how do you start doing that? Either government, again, in many cases government को शायद participate करना पड़ेगा कि take back mandatory करे, कि जब आप बेच रहे हो product तो एक certain deposit रखा जाए. But some of those things, I think it can't be done independently. It has to be driven largely either by brands who are putting the products, या फिर government का participation तो चाहिएगा.
If I may add to this, so currently we have material across the country. The quantity is huge. There's a lot of opportunity in the space of recycling also. But the biggest problem is the feedstock, collection, the reverse supply chain cost to the recycling setup. And if somebody is able to crack that in today's world where technology, blockchain, everything plays a beautiful role, that will be the winning side of it. Deposit refund scheme is one of the examples wherein it is being introduced in our country. It is there already in 50 or 55 European countries. How DRS works, how DRS makes sure that EPR's extended producer responsibility functions smoothly with the traceability and transparency, which was supposed to be there, but it's not there. So what I'm saying is somebody who can crack how to collect material from the household, post-consumer reject, it's called. There are two materials, post-consumer reject and post-industrial reject. Industrial reject is being collected smoothly, but post-consumer reject, if it is being collected, created a smooth reverse supply chain, then that's where the winners are. Feedstock is going to be the biggest challenge, how to collect it, how to transport it. And we've been trying to do the same in a way. But now, a lot of technical intervention is being introduced, especially DRS. DRS might be of help because it streamlines your material, it brings transparency, and it makes the end consumer responsible enough by depositing certain amount on each and every material. So Goa is one state which is exploring DRS now. Himachal might be the second one.
What is DRS?
DRS is deposit refund scheme, and जैसे बचपन में अगर याद होगा कोल्ड ड्रिंक की बॉटल हम लेने जाते थे शॉपकीपर से, दे यूज्ड टू चार्ज 2 rupees 5 rupees. और आप वापस लेके जाओगे तो 5 रुपये आपको मिलेंगे. दिस इज द मोस्ट बेसिक एक्सप्लेनेशन ऑफ DRS. It's very complex now because of the variety of material, as he said, that there are in the market, that how to control that, because upstream has the power to control what kind of material they put in the market. We are in the downstream. We collect, we segregate, we transport, and they hold a lot of, if we unite, upstream and downstream, then we find a lot of solutions. But this is one example which needs to be explored. We did a pilot project in Mani Mahesh of DRS, that how one single entry point location can control incoming and outgoing material, and how DRS can be implemented. And we were pretty successful with the shopkeepers, with the Langarwala community, because it's a religious place, a lot of people come in. And we collected 98% of the material which is being used by the shopkeepers and the Langarwalas because of the DRS. What we did was we scanned manually sticked QR codes on each and every material. We scanned the QR code. Now we know that this particular shop has 2,000 plastic bottles. And by the end of the yatra, he will deposit that material back to us, because we charge certain amount from him, and we'll refund that money. So we were able to tackle one part of it. We were not able to tackle the consumer side of it, because it was too early, and there were a lot of manual things we're supposed to do. So this can be one of the way forwards. We need to explore this.
Thank you so much for adding that, Pradeep. Swapan, to you now. So nature-based solutions sound very powerful, but are also complex. If a young entrepreneur wants to enter the space, where should they realistically begin? If you get the groove, what I'm trying to do is just ask, how do you get into this space? And because of because you three are solving in this space, who's better than three of you to give us ideas? So if someone wants to start in nature-based solutions, what do you recommend?
Great, thank you. That's a very important, yet complex question. So first is that let's define what a nature-based solution is. Before that, just for in terms of context, I think that we must re-emphasize the criticality of the ecosystem that we are talking about here, right? The Himalayas right now as seen as maybe a national asset, awaken some cultural joy in us. But what we need to do is to reframe this whole context as critical infrastructure and almost designate them as a national stability system, right? If Himalayas regulate 40% water availability to each and every Indian, if water availability or water systems in the Himalayas collapse, half of India will be either drowned or in drought. Our food production systems will collapse. So if that is the criticality, first and foremost, what can we all do to ensure that entrepreneurs who are focusing on conserving the Himalayan ecosystem are paid, are compensated for this effort and for the avoidance of risk? That's first and foremost. In the solving for this problem, in solving for the crisis, ecological crisis in the Himalayas, nature-based solutions have a very, very major role to play. What are nature-based solutions? Nature-based solution is any intervention that leverages the power of nature to solve for in terms of addressing disaster, building disaster resilience, addressing climate mitigation, addressing climate vulnerability, enhancing food security, creating jobs related to enhancing food security and resilience, saving water systems. There are estimates now which show that 50% of all springs in the Himalayas are heavily stressed. And if we don't address them, all of these springs are going to dry. If the springs dry, then there is going to be no water for the Himalayan people, but downstream the rivers are also going to dry. So these are all different crises. Examples of nature-based solutions include afforestation, forest conservation, addressing agriculture and forest waste. Actually, addressing the issue of waste entering water systems is also a nature-based solution. Addressing disaster resilience by slope stabilization, bioenergy. These are all examples of nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions typically combine or should combine 3 different kind of revenue streams that everybody has to think of if we start designing nature-based solutions. The first is the tangible revenue stream, which is how much compost are you producing? How much water are you saving? How many tons of organic food are you yielding from your agriculture systems? How much energy are you generating? That's the easiest to quantify and to value in current market systems. What people like us are trying to do, and trying very hard to do, is to help entrepreneurs also value the other 2 streams. The second is the intangible environmental revenue streams, which include carbon credits, which many of us would have all of us heard of carbon credits? Do we all know how to claim carbon credits? Which is an emerging stream for which there is very positive increasing demand these days. But there are also biodiversity credits. We are doing India's first pilot on biodiversity credits now. There is also something called now water credits, and there is a new thing called plastic waste credits. So these are environmental markets. Many of these are global markets. In some ways, many of these can be local markets. Do you know one of the best examples of a water credit system in India actually exists in the Himalayas? It's in Palampur. There has been an ongoing pilot for the last 20 years where there are hoteliers who together collect some money. It's not too much, it's about 20,000 rupees a year, and then they pay the forest department to actually maintain the catchment of a stream that supplies water to Palampur city. So this is a very interesting example of directly compensating for an ecosystem service. These are the kind of models that NBS entrepreneurs can generate. NBS entrepreneurs, the third model that we need to try and monetize, which we all need to think through, is the avoidance of risk model. How do you price avoidance of risk? If you really think about it, our governments are investing millions and millions and millions of dollars or crores and crores of rupee in the notion of avoidance of risk. What are these risks? Migration. He was mentioning today that chemical agriculture has led to a lot of pollution. I would also argue that what's happening now, Pradeep, is that it's also led to degradation. Moving away from the traditional tree cropping and bunding system has led to so much soil runoff, so much contamination of the soil, that now agriculture productivity has declined so much that people are actually abandoning agriculture systems. So migration. The Uttarakhand government has a whole migration commission which has budgets of hundreds of thousands of crores, but it's not really addressing the core issue because it's not linking to regenerative model which will keep people back. So that's an avoidance of risk problem. How do you then go to this government and say that instead of spending this as a subsidy, link it to outcomes of success from my business model? If I am able to retain 10 people in a village, give me credit. The second avoidance of risk is water. If you are able to revive springs, what is the value? What is the value for a government of reviving springs in a district or a catchment where there would have been no water? It's immeasurable, right? So that's the third stream in terms of water. So now if you were to look at these models and if you were to identify some of these, my suggestion would be, in summary, look at a model that has one highly bankable revenue stream: collecting pine needles for biochar, collecting waste and turning it into compost. Look at a stream which can directly be linked to markets. Add on top of that a stream which is readily accessible in the environmental markets. And the best option is carbon. For everything that we have spoken today, there is a carbon revenue stream. And then third, I think that, Kamna, we all need to collectively start looking at quantifying. This is something that our colleagues are doing, but we need to collectively look at quantifying the avoidance of risk in Himalayas. Himalaya is a prime geography for us to do this, and appeal to governments, appeal to regulators to start giving that as incentive to entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you so much for sharing that. It was such a powerful speech. My earrings also fell off now. But Swapan, thank you for sharing this, because I think just like we talk more about carbon credits, AI everywhere, in our domain, we talk about carbon credits so often now. And I think more and more of us have to be educated about it and know what all opportunities lie in that. Now that we have covered from all three of you, how one can start perhaps in waste management, in e-waste, in developing nature-based solutions, how do we moving on to, just the second scale of it, that how do we move from local action to scale? Because everyone in the audience, and especially the PIs that we have here today, and I see one who is also doing pine-based biochar, and then a lot of such innovations, right? How do you build these solutions from local action to scale? Pradeep, I'll again start with you. You work in high altitude terrain. It's physically, logistically very challenging. You shared it's 7 rupees. There is a 7 rupee thing that you need to now double click on perhaps. But what is the hard lesson that you have learned about building systems in such a fragile region? and how should people look at it to circumvent that or navigate that such hard physical terrain?
Yeah, so from local to global, I guess. So we started very small. We started with the simple idea that I want to clean this particular location. We organized a cleanup drive, and then we replicated the same. We went to different locations. We engaged thousands of volunteers, local communities, and from there on, we realized what will happen to the waste that we are collecting. That's where we started building these small-scale infrastructural material recovery facility to handle solid waste. At least because in Himalayan ecosystem, we need a place to store, segregate, and once we have enough volume, then we need to transport. Now, if I'll tell you from Spiti, if we have to transport minimum 7 tons of material. That will only make financial viability. That was the second step. So along the way, we found our steps. That was the second one. Then we replicated. Now we have 10 material recovery facilities. We collect about 9 to 10 tons per day in different topographies. We have highest, material recovery facility built last year, which is at Kedarnath, 11,570 feet, which is the highest in the country, motorable, non-motorable. So secondly, we built that. Now we are adding few more verticals, upcycling and recycling. Upcycling within the facility that we have, that how we can add value into the existing waste collection ecosystem, because cleaning drives, it's good activity. You make somebody's Sunday, you ruin somebody's Sunday by organizing a cleaning drive. That's one part to it. People come and learn that how difficult it is to collect waste when it's littered somewhere, especially in the Himalayan ecosystem. Just to collect 1 kg of single-use plastic, you have to bend down for about 400 times. Such an amazing yoga it is for us. So we do that every Sunday. Then this is the good part of it. You highlight the issue, you engage communities, but how to make it financially viable, how to scale it, is the second part, which is the most crucial part. Material recovery facilities to store and create volume, because you can't just transport 2 kg or 10 kg or 20 kg, because the nearest facility sometimes from our locations is two days drive away. And the value that we get is very low still. The cost of collection in the Himalayan region is very, very high. The cost of segregation, the expertise, taking that expertise to a remote region is again very difficult. Making people understand the segregation aspect, how critical, important it is, that is again very important. Third is adding upcycling, small little bit of upcycling, which adds a lot of value. But yes, your product has to be very, very good, because market is unforgiving. If you put out materials or products which are not liked by the people, then they will not buy it. So it's not viable. So you need to invest right amount of money into that. Third is recycling. Now, as I told you that almost 60 to 65% of our recycling ecosystem in the country is informal. But with the kind of policies that are coming in now, the informal sector will slowly shrink. And the formal sector, which is tech-based, transparency-based, latest machinery-based, and the demand which is being generated by the FMCG space through certain policies. For example, 30% of the recycled material will be used in SDPE. In last 5 years, if you see the transformation, PET to RPET, in food grade, we never had any recycled material. Now plastic bottles will be converted into plastic bottles again. Before 5 years, it was converted into polyester, all the fabric that we use. It is downcycling, not recycling. So these are some of the changes that are happening in the market and how you can align. But again, coming back to the previous thing that I said, how do you control your feedstock? How do you collect your material is going to be very, very prominent in this whole supply chain that we are trying to create. So waste collection, segregation, aggregation, recycling, decentralized upcycling, these are some of the ecosystems that we need to align with the practices that we do, along with the engagement of the community. We need to create leaders. We can't run all the material recovery facilities. At Kedarnath also, at Atal Tunnel also, in Kaja also, we can't do that. So we create local entrepreneurs everywhere. They can become the on-ground force that we need, and then that's how we replicate and upscale our on-ground efforts, or the recycling ecosystem that we are trying to build. We can't control everything, so we need to create more people. Livelihood is again, migration is because one of the biggest reasons people are moving away from villages is because there's no livelihood. Traditional livelihood is dying. The pastoralism which was there earlier is slowly we are giving up away. And upcycling at the household level is almost as good as dead. Nobody's upcycling anything. Nobody's reusing anything. So we are introducing livelihoods through waste management, one of the key components. And there are multiple policies that supports it. So this is how we upscale. In terms of the policies that are there, DRS is again needs to be explored. Just by putting up reverse vending machines, we have failed miserably. 5 years back, lots of companies came in, sold their machines. It was stationed at railway station, airports, etc. Nobody used them, and it became a glorified dustbin eventually. So how do we, find out what is the local requirement rather than just following the European standard of putting up a machine at the railway station or the airport? And how do we make a shopkeeper reverse vending machine? This needs to be addressed. How do we incentivize if somebody is collecting this much amount of waste on a day-to-day basis? They can become the reverse vending machine for us and also can be incentivized through certain models. So this is, again, we are exploring that how Himachal or Uttarakhand maybe, and eventually northeastern states, because there's a lot of development that is happening in the northeastern states now. Civic sense is good, much better than the north, but in terms of infrastructure, they are far behind. They don't even know properly what is the MRF and how it is being operated. So these are certain aspects. Northeast, again, in the 13 Himalayan states that we have, Northeast will open doors pretty soon for the economic opportunities as well, but especially in the waste management. So yes, from local to global, these are certain way forwards that we can sort of use. This is what we've been using, and pretty successful also.
Thank you, Pradeep, for sharing that. I know there's time constraint, but I will just go with this last thing that I want to do. Pranshu, waste systems often involve informal workers and scattered supply chains. How do you bring structure without disrupting existing livelihoods? Because you are primarily working in the kabadiwala space, right? So it's recycling and everything is glorified kabadiwalas. But how do you, and it's a very, you are trying to just make in a very irregular sector, in a very informal sector, livelihoods out of it. All three of you actually, and especially Pradeep, you too. Super. So how do you, how do you involve informal waste workers? And also in the same, if you can cover, I think what I hear a sentiment is also about how do you inform and communicate about this huge problem to the communities where we work. So how do you do that, Pranshu?
So the role of informal sector in waste actually varies at a product level. And this is a very important point which I'd like to park. Sometimes we assume informality in paper waste versus plastic waste versus electronic waste versus battery waste is the same. The answer is no, it is very different. So when we talk of informality and the biggest issues that you see with solid waste, where you have paper, you have plastics of various varieties. So what you see is actually a slave-like behavior. Sorry, I'm using a very tough term, but that's what it is. People who have migrated from, different parts of the country, are taken by people who are mafia in cities. They are offered some, space to live, offered some, in many cases, even drugs. In many cases, just some cash. But most importantly, a shelter and something. And that is what we regularly see. You see children, you see all sorts of people who are ill. So that's where the curse of informality is. That and this is predominant in the plastics, in the solid waste management space. The moment you shift your views to, let's say, electronic waste, battery waste, you see a very different sort of informal. You don't see this sort of people, because then you are talking of a person who is coming to your home, bargaining with you. He may cheat you by, rigging the scale and so forth, but someone who is actually not a child labor, so there is a big differentiation in how people are organized in the informal sector. Another thing which I like to, point out is informal sector itself is at least a 7 to 8 tiered structure. Right from waste pickers who are at the lowest bottom and, who are kind of really the most ill-treated, mostly like slaves in the system. And, having worked with so many of them, I don't even know how to solve that problem because it is so deeply rooted And you have so many urban schemes of government, but nothing seems to ever reach them. So where we are trying to work is mostly on the complex material side, so electronics, electronics, batteries, glass, where the system is very different. So essentially what we are trying to do is we want to cut off the recycling part, because the negativity or the negative externalities are when people try to recycle in a wrong way. So for example, आपको copper निकालना है wire से, तो रात को उसमें आग लगा दो. You know, if you have to extract some, let's say, precious metals out of a circuit board, if there are any, then you use cyanide-based acid baths and you just dump them. So the problem is not really on the collection side, the problem is on the recycling side. So the systems that we end up creating are essentially promoting you collect, but sell it to a formal side and get the same money that you get if you were to extract this material. So in some sense, there is no loss for a person who's engaged in an informal space, and they end up making the same money if they were to recycle. The big problem which is starting to emerge, not starting to, I think it is provident all of us would be facing this, is the issue of GST in this space. And it's a huge nightmare for informal, because when informal is collecting waste, there is no invoicing, there is no GST which is levied. Somewhere someone, you know, in that value chain, a tier 2 or tier 3 player, starts generating a GST invoice, because a player like me would only buy waste when there is an invoice. Or, you know, we would like the systems to be clean, we would like the systems to be traceable, and GST is a good way. Now, while government at one end says that, you know, include informal, formalize, the GST officials have a very different perspective. They say, kabhi inke saath kaam karo to tumko band kar denge. So essentially you are stuck into a very wrong space, and this is a problem across the country. चाहे plastic waste हो, आप भी face करते होगे ये. चाहे, you know, so at one end government is suggesting make systems inclusive. At the other end, the GST departments are essentially pushing कि informal के साथ कभी काम मत करो. Without realizing the fact कि जब सबसे पहले waste उठा तो invoice है ही नहीं ना. मतलब जब मैं आपके घर से जाके उठा रहा हूँ एक phone, एक charger, एक वॉशिंग मशीन, तो मैं तो इनवॉइस नहीं दे रहा, यू नो, ना वहाँ पे रेसिप्ट आ रही, ना वहाँ जीएसटी है. So what is happening is, because the GST, again a stupid thing in our country is that we have kept a very high GST on waste, or 18%. Now what happens is, some corrupt people in this whole value chain are buying bills from the market. So again, there are issues, very systemic issues which need to be solved to solve these problems. You know, otherwise we can keep on dreaming informal को formal कर लेंगे, ये कर लेंगे, बहुत खूब सारी बातें हो रही हैं 8-10 साल से इस पे, but progress zero है. क्योंकि issues systemic हैं, and वो systemic कोई बात ही नहीं करना चाहता उस पे.
Thank you.
Just to add
for
one
sharing.
point,
Yes.
waste management, circular economy has become the buzzword for last 4-5 years now. And when we talk about circular economy, we always talk about informal sector. But there are multiple verticals of circular economy, not just waste picking and collecting. But we always make sure that the informal sector stick to that level only. We need to uplift them to other verticals as well. And this is very important if we need to create an ecosystem wherein they also become part of GST. Otherwise, so many companies shut down because the feedstock is not coming and they have to raise invoice. And so many people went to the finance minister also just to say that this is a very small thing you might be feeling right now, but when you work in the space, this is one of the biggest problems. So we need to introduce, just not just the waste picking up to the informal sector, but beyond that, what are the other verticals of circular economy?
Thank you so much for sharing that, Pradeep. I think a lot of community-led voices, and then of course real-time challenges come through these conversations. Thank you for making it a very honest conversation. Swapan, my question and last question of the evening, and then maybe if you have 5 minutes, we'll open it for the audience. What makes environmental or restoration projects attractive for funding, or primarily so, what makes it investable? If you can maybe lend a voice on that.
Sure, will do. What makes restoration financeable is, I think I partly answered this in my first round where I said that you have to stack cash flows. You have to stack different kind of revenue streams. You need to make your projects measurable. One of the big challenges right now is that your traditional investors don't have faith or trust in community-based, forget about anything, community-based projects in general. Because they feel that community-based projects lack any measurement, lack any transparency. So you need to build measurability. And right now there is a huge opportunity with technology, be it with distributed ledger-based monitoring or remote sensing-based monitoring. So measurability, stacking of cash flows, and then the third is just very good quality implementation. I also want to, Kamna, use this opportunity to answer your first question that you, or your question that you had posed to all of us in this round as to how do you make these projects, all of these projects scale, you know. So because we've gone through this cycle in several landscapes, failed somewhere, succeeded somewhere, I want to share that scaling of a good community-based restoration, conservation, or for that matter, a waste management project, everybody has to think of three elements of scaling. First is that have you demonstrated a proven business model in your first or second or third pilots, right? Very often we start scaling without we have a proven business model. And a proven business model means that have you completed at least one cycle of getting returns into the system to pay for your capex successfully. Be it from one cash flow, second cash flow, third cash flow. That's very important. Once you have a proven business model, you become very attractive to investors. So first is proven business model. The second thing is that then you need to look at what lever of scale do you want to use. There are three levers of scale that we've identified. First lever of scale is access to capital. Do you have access to a lot of capital? That drives scale, right? You've landed a big grant, or you've identified a big funder, or you've just received a big inheritance from your long lost uncle, whatever it is. Do you have access to huge capital? The second is, do you have access to a huge community base? If you want to scale up pine needles, or if you want to scale up composting, the biggest transaction cost is access to community based. If you already have that, and if you have a proven model, capital will come to you. So either you have capital, or you have business model, or you have access to community. The third is, have you been able to align yourself to solving a very major social risk? Then capital will come to you. If you can prove tangibly that through my approach, I will solve the migration problem of Uttarakhand, or I will solve the waste problem of our rivers, or I will solve the issue of springs drying, then capital come to you. But that requires measurability. One of the problems in our sector is that because all of us entrepreneurs are struggling to make ends meet, are struggling to just get projects started, we lack the bandwidth and the resources to really be able to very scientifically document our impact on social risk. We talk about it, but we don't have evidence. And that's what stops us from scaling. So if you have one proven model and any one of these three levers, that is the anchor based on which you'll get the rest. But you need to have one of these levers. And you need to identify which lever to go after. It's a very important decision. If you start going after finance, you will not have the bandwidth for either scientific impact or the bandwidth for community aggregation. Or you start going after community aggregation, then you will, because you don't have unlimited bandwidth, right? You're not like a large international NGO who can have one team working with banks, one team working on ground, and one team working on science. So this is a very critical discussion. This is also actually a failure of policy and of the ecosystem, because technically there should be platforms that can help entrepreneurs do one or the other. But that's missing. That's what we all are trying to create now. But in the interim, we are on our own and we need to identify which one to run. Yeah, that's what I'll say. And finally, lastly, don't underestimate the value of environmental markets, carbon, biodiversity. These are real. Come talk to us if you'd like to see how to use them. But they can be one of your good quality cash flows now. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Swapan. I think a lot of real-time learnings to take from this session. At least for me, I learned so much about upstream and downstream flow of work here. How community plays a huge role in not just how we can actually drive them for more awareness, and then just real solutions. No fluff. Real talk about how limited we are in this space, but how we can probably just elevate each other and ourselves, and then real ideas on how we can build it, be it water credits, plastic credits, carbon credits. So much happening in this space today. We just have last 3-4 minutes to open up for questions. If anyone has any question, we can have a quick 1 or 2 questions from the audience today. No questions? Yes.
Hi, thank you for a very enlightening session to all the speakers. What Mr. Mehra said that there's a need of a big capital inflow which stops you if you're working on a financial side. Then somebody has to take care of your outreach. So Mr. Mehra, you are sitting there. Pradeep Sangwan, he's here, who has a whole lot of community outreach program going on. Do you need the ministry to step in and tell you what to do? I mean, it's just simple mathematics of what synergy can be brought in. And then once that simple things start coming up, somebody is going to fund the whole initiative. And what Mr. Singhal said about documentation, I think when we purchase a washing machine, for example, there's a tag, somebody is selling it to you, LG. Then LG tracks it to the way to the after sales service station. You can add another quarter to it, says that, okay, this is the end of the lifestyle for this scanner, which begins at the showroom or at the production facility. So I think there's a whole lot of possibilities. I'm not sure if you've sat on the table together, but I think maybe you should. Humble suggestion. Thank you for a beautiful session. Namaste.
Well, we are sitting on the table together, maybe two tables, so we need to turn them into one table. But no, definitely. Look, there are two, three things. One is we were just speaking that we should connect after this because there are ways and means for us to use our relative expertise. You don't need the government stepping in essentially in everything. There is a lot that can be done just using the existing policy framework. The other thing is alignment like this, if we can scale up our intervention, can also lead to new policy. One thing I must mention is all of us have to start thinking about whether we want somebody to fund our work or whether we want somebody to invest in our work. There are two different mindsets here, right? There are certain things which will never be investable by the market and they require either philanthropy or public finance. They scale up slower. But it's true. I mean, for example, building disaster shelters in highly GLOF-prone areas of the Himalayas will probably never be a business model. It should always be government funded. So there our effort has to be internalized in policy. But then the second is there are some models which can be investable. That's what I think people like us need to work together on doing, that how can we make waste segregation and treatment in remote Himalayas an investable model. That can attract private capital, which is much faster. But you're right. One of the missing links here is that who is convening people like us to regularly work together? Those platforms are very few, scattered. The work is very scattered. And the platforms are not that connected. And we need to make those platforms. You're
I have
right.
a small pointer to make.
They are making that platform.
Just one last pointer. In the landslides, Himachal region, the official reports say lost 14,000 crores. I'm not sure if Himachal is making that kind of money, even with tourism, that the money they are losing. So I think if we made the ends connect of the financial impact and losses incurred in the natural disasters, those kind of models making shelters will probably be making more sense to the government.
So I'll just give you a tiny example. Look, this is called a risk-based outcome finance for all of us to know. This is something that is starting quite a bit around the world. I'll give you a 30-second example of what happened. In New York, the prison system wanted to raise a lot of money to build educational institutions for the inmates. They were not getting capital grants from the government, so they raised private finance to build the education systems. They issued a bond, outcome bond. What they got from their government was an assurance that if, based on education, the number of prisoners who don't come back to the prison, repeat offenders goes down, the government will pay back the bond. They saw like a 80-90% success. This is a famous case study. We are trying a lot in India to get the government to look at outcome-based risk finance. Can we tell the Himachal government that we will raise money to sustainably manage all of your catchments? If the disasters go down, then instead of 14,000 crores, you repay our investor 5,000 crores. But as you can imagine, this is not very easy to do in India, because you have to go through a very complex public finance system to get them on measurable outcome indicator versus spending capex on schemes which for all reasons is very, very politically, financially lucrative. But this is work in progress. Something is happening here. MP government has launched a policy on outcome finance. We should all work on this. It will not be easy, trust me. It will be very difficult.
Thank you so much for that question, and thank you so much to all the panelists for coming on board here and for such an insightful session. I hope we had a good time. Yeah. So a big round of applause for everyone here and for all of you to join us here. Thank you so much. Yeah.